The wind came down from the Beartooth Range like a divine judgment, a white-fanged wolf of a wind that cared nothing for the mortals scraping a living in its shadow. It screamed, a high-pitched, maddening sound that scoured the landscape and turned the air into a tumult of ice. Eli Walker bent his head, letting the brim of his hat take the worst of the needles. His horse, a raw-boned gelding named Buster, shuddered beneath him. But the animal was too seasoned in the Montana Territory to do anything but keep moving. Eli was on his way back from his high-country trap line, a 3-day ride that had yielded almost nothing. The haul was meager. 2 marten, 1 fox with a patchy pelt. It was not enough. It was never enough. The cold was a living beast, clawing through his thick wool coat and the buffalo hide he'd wrapped around his legs. He was a man carved from the same hard granite as the mountains around him, but even he was beginning to feel the edges of his endurance fray. He had been alone for so long that the solitude was a second skin, but this kind of cold made a man feel his own mortality in a way that was sharp and personal. He smelled the frozen river before he saw it, that scent of iron-hard ice and still, deep water. He was navigating by the shape of the ridge he knew was to his left, a darker line in a world that had been reduced to white and gray. Then he saw it. It was not white. It was not gray. It was not the brown of bare timber. It was blue, a patch of dark, impossible blue, huddled against a snowdrift near the riverbank. He pulled Buster to a halt. The horse tossed its head, eager for the small, wind-blasted log cabin in the lean-to that waited 3 miles distant. "Easy, boy," Eli muttered, his voice instantly stolen by the gale. He stared. It was not a trick of the light, not a shadow. It was a shape, half-buried, unmoving. It was wrong. Everything in this high country had its place. The rocks, the pines, the snow. This did not belong. He swung his leg over the saddle, his joints cracking in the sub-zero air. His boots, thick and wrapped in burlap, punched through the crust of the snow, sinking him to his knees. He grunted, pushing forward. Each step was a battle against the drift and the wind that tried to send him sprawling. He reached the shape and knelt, his gloved hand brushing away the fresh powder that already sought to claim it. It was a woman. She was face down, a tangle of dark hair frozen to the snow. He put his hands on her shoulder, his touch rough, and rolled her over. His breath hitched. He had seen men frozen, seen animals caught in the grip of the wild, but this was something else. She was young, her face the color of porcelain, her lips a dull, bruised plum. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. But it was the coat that stopped him. It was dark blue velvet, trimmed with a fur he did not recognize. Not beaver, not wolf, not fox. It was too fine, too soft, utterly impractical. Underneath, her skirt was a heavy wool, but it was tailored, cut in a way he had never seen. Her boots, visible where the snow had been blown clear, were thin-soled, decorative things, now split open by the ice. This was city clothing. This was money. This was the kind of attire a woman wore in a carriage or in a parlor in San Francisco. It had no business here, hundreds of miles from anything, in the teeth of a blizzard. He pressed 2 numb fingers against her neck, beneath the angle of her jaw. He waited. The wind howled, a mocking laugh. He waited again. Nothing. He cursed under his breath. A small, sharp sound. He was about to turn away. A life lost to the territory was a common story. A sad one, but common. Then he felt it. A flutter, weak as a trapped moth, faint as a memory. But it was there. She was alive. Eli was not a soft man. The mountains, the swindlers, and the back-breaking loneliness had burned the softness out of him years ago. His father's ranch, lost to a mining syndicate and a crooked judge, had been the last of his softer self. He was a man who lived by the trigger and the trap, who trusted nothing but the earth under his feet and the weight of the rifle in his hands. But you did not leave a body to freeze. Not even a stranger. Not even one who had been foolish enough to bring velvet to a blizzard. He grunted, scooping her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. A sack of cold bones and wet, expensive fabric. Getting her onto Buster was a trial. The horse shied, smelling the strangeness of her, the faint, lingering scent of perfume and fear that clung to her even in this frozen state. "Stand, damn you," Eli growled, his voice a low rumble. He finally managed to sling her across the saddle, face down, like a fresh-killed deer. He could not risk her sliding off if she woke, or if she died. He took a length of rope from his saddlebag and, with grim, practical efficiency, lashed her to the saddle. He hated the look of it, but it was necessary. He could not ride, not with her on the saddle and the blizzard turning the world into a white void. He took the horse's reins. He put his head down, turned his back to the worst of the wind as best he could, and began to walk. It was 3 miles to his cabin. It might as well have been 300. The wind turned, hitting them broadside, trying to push the heavy horse over. The snow was deeper now. The drifts sculpted into massive, treacherous waves. Eli walked in a haze of white, operating on memory alone. He thought of the pelts hanging in his shed. He thought of the fire, low in his stove. He thought of the sheer, stupid, impossible luck that led a woman dressed for a theater into the heart of a Montana winter. It took him nearly 3 hours. He was a creature of ice and exhaustion by the time the dark shape of his cabin appeared. Little more than a log box, chinked with frozen mud and banked with snow to the sills. He kicked the door open, a gust of snow and wind chasing him inside. The cabin was a single room, dark and low-ceilinged. A cast-iron stove in the corner radiated a dull, precious heat. A narrow cot was shoved against one wall, a rough-hewn table and one chair against the other. Pelts were stacked in a corner, and traps hung from pegs by the door. It was the home of a man who expected no visitors and desired none. He cut her free and carried her inside, his muscles screaming. He laid her on the cot. His bed. It was the only one. He worked with a clumsy speed, his fingers stiff. He had to get the wet, frozen clothes off her. He pulled off her ruined boots, wincing as a piece of leather came away, stuck to her skin. Her feet were waxy and white. He did not know if they could be saved. He took his skinning knife, the tool he knew best, and carefully, precisely, cut the laces of her corset through the velvet coat, the ridiculous, whale-boned contraption that was surely restricting her breath. He peeled the coat and the dress away, leaving her in her underthings, a chemise of such fine linen it felt like a whisper against his rough hands. He averted his eyes, a strange heat rising in his neck, and quickly covered her with his thickest buffalo robe. He stoked the fire, adding logs until the stove roared, the metal ticking as it expanded. Then he sat in his chair, exhausted, and watched her. She woke up 2 days later. Eli was at the table, sharpening the knife he had used to free her. When her eyes opened, they were gray, wide and bottomless, and filled with a terror so deep it looked like madness. She tried to scream, but only a dry, rasping crackle came from her throat. She scrambled backward, pushing herself against the log wall, her hands raised. "Easy," Eli said. He kept his voice low and did not move. "You're safe. You were in the snow. I found you." She stared at him, her gaze flickering from his face to the knife in his hand. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder, with a beard thick and untrimmed. His eyes were the color of the winter sky, pale and unreadable. He was the very picture of the danger she had been running from. "Where?" Her voice was a bare whisper. "My cabin. High country, north of Yellowstone." He set the knife down, slowly, and pushed it away. "Found you by the river. You've been here 2 days. You had a fever." Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the stacked rifles by the door, the traps, the animal pelts, the sheer, crushing isolation of the place. This was not safe. This was just a different kind of trap. "Who are you?" she whispered, her throat raw. "Eli Walker. Who are you?" She hesitated. He saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes, a sharp, desperate cunning that cut through the fog of her fear. She was thinking, and thinking fast. "Sarah," she said, her voice cracking. "My name is Sarah Smith." It was a lie. It was as plain and obvious as the stove in the room. as simple as the tin cup on the table. But Eli just nodded. "Well, Sarah Smith, you're lucky to be breathing." How did I get here?" she asked, her brow furrowing. The fever and the cold had stolen her memory of the arrival. "A small mercy. I was hoping you'd tell me." She shook her head, a small, jerky movement, and winced from the pain. I do not remember." Another lie, Eli figured, or perhaps a half-truth. It did not matter. He stood up, and she flinched again. "I've got stew," he said, ignoring her reaction. "You need to eat." He was not a natural nurse. His hands, calloused and scarred from traps and ropes and axes, were made for breaking, not mending. He spooned the venison stew into a tin bowl, his movements awkward. The stew was thick, hot, and smelled of salt and dried onion. It was all he had. He brought it to her, but she flinched so badly when he got close that he stopped, holding the bowl out. "It ain't much, but it's hot." She took it with hands that trembled violently. She tried to lift the spoon to her lips, but her fingers were too weak, too stiff. She spilled most of the first attempt down the front of the buffalo robe. A look of complete, abject humiliation crossed her face. And then, to his horror, she began to cry. They were not loud sobs, but silent, hot tears of frustration that rolled down her chapped cheeks. Eli let out a long, slow breath. He took the bowl and the spoon from her. "Sit up," she obeyed, her body shaking. He sat on the edge of the cot. It creaked in protest, and held the spoon to her lips. "Eat." She stared at him, her gray eyes warring between a profound fear and a desperate animal need. Finally, she parted her lips. He fed her, spoonful after spoonful. He did not say a word. He stared at the far wall, his jaw tight with the sheer, uncomfortable intimacy of the act. The cabin was silent save for the wind and the small, wet sounds of her swallowing. He had tended to her feet as best he could. They were bad, frostbitten, the skin blackening on two of her small toes. He had done what he knew, rubbing them with snow to bring the feeling back, a brutal, agonizing process that had made her pass out, and then wrapping them in clean rags soaked in tallow and herbs. He did not know if she would keep the toes. When the stew was gone, she fell back against the pillow, a flour sack stuffed with dried grass, and was asleep in an instant, the exhaustion and fever pulling her back under. Eli watched her. The fever gave her cheeks a false, rosy color. In sleep, the fear left her face, leaving something else, a softness, a refinement that was as out of place here as her velvet coat. He banked the fire, checked the latch on the door. He took his spare buffalo robe, the older, thinner one, and spread it on the floorboards near the stove. It was the warmest spot in the cabin, but the floor was as hard and cold as iron. He lay down, his rifle within arm's reach. He was a man alone, but tonight, strangely, he was not. The blizzard did not stop. It raged for 4 more days, a solid, screaming white that erased the world. The snow piled up against the single, small window, plunging the cabin into a permanent, hazy twilight. The wind shrieked in the chimney, a chorus of lost souls. They were trapped. The cabin, already small, shrank with every passing hour. The silence between them grew heavy and thick, broken only by the howl of the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the scrape of Eli's knife as he carved a piece of wood into a spoon. Maggie, or Sarah, as he called her, grew stronger. The fever broke, leaving her pale and weak. But the raw terror in her eyes was replaced by a watchful, guarded intelligence. She was a woman on the run. He had decided, and she was doing everything she could to hide it. Eli saw it all. He was a man who noticed things. It was how he survived. He saw her, when she thought he was not looking, trying to shove a piece of clothing deeper into her ruined velvet bag. He had caught a glimpse, white, impossibly white, and soft. Not wool or flannel, silk. He had seen silk once, on a card table in a high-stakes saloon in Cheyenne, worn by a woman who charged $10 just to talk. He saw her hands. When she was finally able to feed herself, he saw them clearly, They were pale, the nails clean and shaped, unbroken. There was not a single callus, not one scar, not a patch of rough skin. These were hands that had never hauled water, chopped wood, wrung out a washcloth, or scrubbed a floor. She tried to help. That was the most telling, and the most pitiful part. She stood up one morning, swaying on her bandaged feet. I will tidy." She picked up the broom, a bundle of stiff branches Eli had tied together, and stared at it as if it were a foreign weapon. She tried to sweep the packed dirt floor, succeeding only in raising a cloud of dust that sent her into a fit of coughing. She tried to help him with dinner. He handed her a potato and a knife. She held them, turning the potato over and over, and then, with delicate, trembling hands, tried to carve the skin off as if it were a piece of art, taking half the potato with it. Eli watched for a minute before he took the knife from her. His fingers brushed hers, and her hand was so soft it was almost shocking. "You'll cut a finger off," he said, his voice flat. "Sit down." She retreated to the cot, her face burning with a shame he did not understand. Eli went back to his work, his mind churning. He had pieced it together, or so he thought. The fine clothes, the silk, the soft hands, the total, baffling incompetence at the simplest tasks of survival. She was not a homesteader's wife. That was certain. He figured she was from a fancy house back east, or maybe down in Helena. A saloon girl, one of the expensive ones, had gotten into trouble, maybe with a dangerous customer, maybe with the man who owned her, and ran, or perhaps a preacher's daughter, suffocated by piety, who had run off with a gambler who had then abandoned her when the money or the luck ran out. Either way, she was a woman who was hiding. It was none of his business. He just wanted the snow to stop. The snow stopped on the 5th day. The silence that fell over the mountains was absolute, heavier and louder than the storm itself. Maggie was well enough to walk, her bandaged feet stuffed into a pair of Eli's old wool socks, but her boots were ruined. The leather was frozen stiff and the soles had split wide open. Eli sat by the fire, pulled one of her boots onto his knee, and examined it. It was a flimsy, useless, city thing. He sighed, a plume of white breath in the cold cabin. He went to his kit and pulled out a leather worker's awl, a thick needle, and a length of sinew. She watched him, his large, rough hands, which she had only seen hold a knife or a rifle, moved with a surprising, practiced dexterity. He did not just patch the boot, he reinforced it, stitching new, thick pieces of cured leather over the split sole, working tallow into the frozen seams to make them waterproof. It was ugly, clumsy work, but it was strong. He finished one and tossed it onto the cot. "It'll hold. It ain't pretty, but it'll keep your feet from freezing off." She picked up the boot. It was heavy, scarred, and strong. It was. She realized with a sudden, sharp pang, an act of profound, unspoken care. Later that evening, the fragile tension between them shifted. Eli was reaching for the heavy coffee pot on the stove, and the sleeve of his flannel shirt, already worn thin, caught on a nail he used as a potholder. It ripped, a long, tearing sound, from his cuff halfway to his elbow. "Damn it all," he muttered, looking at the gash. A problem he did not have the time or the skill to fix. Before he could react, Maggie stood up. "Take it off." He blinked, turning to look at her. "What?" "Take it off," she repeated, her voice firmer now, less afraid. "Give it to me." Wary, he unbuttoned the shirt and slid it off, revealing the long-sleeved wool undershirt he wore beneath. He handed her the flannel. She went to her bag, the ruined velvet one, from a small, embroidered pouch. She produced a silver needle case. She took out a tiny, sharp needle and a spool of dark thread. Here, at last, was a task she understood. She sat in the chair, his chair, and angled herself to catch the firelight. She began to sew. Her stitches were tiny, perfect, and even. She did not just close the hole. She rewove the fabric, her needle darting back and forth with a practiced, elegant speed that was mesmerizing. Eli sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and watched her. The firelight caught the auburn strands in her dark hair. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. She looked peaceful, for the first time since he had found her. The haunted, hunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet competence. She finished, bit the thread with her teeth, and handed the shirt back to him. The seam was barely visible, a testament to a skill as foreign to him as her velvet coat. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, the word ma'am feeling strange and formal on his tongue. "You are welcome, Mr. Walker," she replied, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips before vanishing. But the peace did not last. The smile faded. As the days wore on, the cabin, a small, snowbound prison. Eli saw the sadness return. It was not just sadness. It was a deep, settled sorrow, a shadow in her gray eyes that never left. He would see her staring into the fire, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white, her face so still she barely seemed to be breathing. And she was afraid. It was more than just the fear of a woman alone with a strange man. This was a fear that was bone deep, a fear she had carried with her into the snow. He learned to move slowly around her. If he stood up too quickly, she would flinch, a sharp, bird-like movement. If he dropped a piece of firewood, her entire body would jolt, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with panic. One afternoon, he came in from checking his snares, stamping the snow from his boots on the doorstep. The door, heavy and wooden, banged against the log wall. Maggie screamed. It was not a gasp. It was a raw, terrified shriek. She had been stirring the stew, and she dropped the spoon, the contents splashing onto the floor. She backed herself into the corner, her hands raised, palms out, as if to ward off a blow. "It's just me," Eli said, freezing in the doorway. "It's just the door." It took her a full minute to come down. Her chest heaved, and she was panting. She slid down the wall until she was crouched and put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Eli stood there, helpless, his heart pounding for a reason he could not name. He was a man of actions, not words. He did not know the words for this kind of fear. He wanted to, touch her, reassure her. He had no idea. He walked past her, quietly, and hung his coat on the peg. He did not look at her again until she had composed herself, retrieved the spoon, and begun to clean the floor. He did not pry. The high country was full of people who did not want to talk about their past. It was the one courtesy the wilderness afforded. He had his own ghosts. She was clearly running from hers. But he realized, with a jolt, that her ghosts were not just memories. They were men. The wind returned that night. It clawed at the roof and moaned down the chimney. A lonesome, terrible sound that made the small cabin feel like the last place on earth. Eli was on the floor, half dozing, wrapped in his robe. The fire was banked, and the cabin was filled with a deep, penetrating cold. He was jolted awake by her voice. "No, no, please do not get away from me." It was a muffled, terrified plea. He sat up. In the dim, red light from the stove's grate, he saw her on the cot, thrashing, tangled in the blankets, her hands fighting something he could not see. "Please, I will not tell. Just let me go. Let me go," she cried out, a sharp, choked sound of pure terror. Eli was on his feet. He crossed the small space in 2 strides, his mind blurred with sleep and alarm. "Sarah, wake up." He put his hand on her shoulder. To shake her, she exploded. She erupted from the bed, awake and screaming, her eyes wide and unseeing. She did not see Eli. She saw whatever was in her dream. She swung at him, her nails grazing his cheek, drawing blood. "Get away!" she shrieked, scrambling off the cot. "Sarah!" he said, his voice sharp, a command. He grabbed her wrists, holding her still as she fought him. "It is Eli. You are in the cabin. You are safe. You are dreaming." Her eyes, wild in the dark, finally focused on him. The moonlight from the snow-covered window cast them in silver and shadow. She was breathing in great, gulping sobs. "Eli," she whispered, the name of a question, an anchor. "I am here," he said, his voice low. She was trembling, a violent full-body shudder that shook them both. She looked at her hands, still locked in his grasp. He let her go. He expected her to pull away, to hide under the blankets, to cry. Instead, she did the last thing he ever would have anticipated. She reached out, her hand clumsy with fear, and seized the rough wool of his undershirt sleeve. She did not say anything. She just held on. Her knuckles were white, her grip desperate. She was not holding him. She was holding herself together. Eli stood there, a statue. The wind howled, a counterpoint to the ragged sound of her breathing. He should go back to his spot on the floor. He should leave her be. It was the proper thing to do. He sat down. He did not sit on the bed. He sat on the hard-packed dirt floor, his back against the log wall, right next to the cot. He sat close enough that her hand could still grip his arm. He said nothing. There were no words for this. He just sat, breathing the cold air, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. A silent guardian in a small log box, miles from anywhere. He felt the tension in her grip slowly, begin to relax. Her breathing deepened. The sobs subsided into occasional, shuddering gasps. He sat there for an hour, maybe 2. He did not move. His legs grew numb, and the cold from the floor seeped into his bones. Finally, her fingers loosened, and her hand slipped from his sleeve, falling onto the blanket. He waited, listening. Her breathing was even, deep. She was asleep. Eli waited another 10 minutes, just to be sure. Then, carefully, so as not to make a sound, he eased himself back to his own cold spot on the floor. He lay down, but he did not sleep. He stared at the patterns of frost on the ceiling, listening to the wind and to the quiet, troubled breathing of the woman who was not named Sarah. Time lost its shape in the high country. The days did not pass so much as they dissolved into one another, a gray and white blur separated only by the ritual of lighting the lantern and banking the fire. The blizzard that had stranded them had laid down a siege of snow so deep it reached the windowsills, turning the interior of the cabin into a permanent, amber-hued twilight. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. It was a quiet, fragile thing, constructed of small movements and unspoken truces. Eli Walker was a man who had lived in silence for a decade. Yet the presence of the woman he called Sarah changed the air in the room. It felt denser, charged with a static that made the hair on his arms stand up even when he was across the room. Maggie, for her part, seemed determined to prove she was not merely another piece of baggage for him to haul. As her strength returned, so did a restless need to be of use. She could not sit idle while he worked. She attacked the floor with the broom Eli had fashioned from birch twigs. She swept with a ferocity that suggested she was trying to scrub away more than just dust. Eli watched her from the corner where he was oiling his traps. She held the broom handle like a dance partner, stiff and formal, her strokes short and inefficient. She missed the corners. She swept the dust into the air rather than out the door. But she swept until her forehead shone with sweat and her breath came short. Cooking was a greater battle. Eli's larder was simple: dried beans, flour, salt pork, coffee, and whatever meat he could bring in. Maggie approached the sack of flour as if it were an explosive. One evening, she insisted on making the biscuits. Eli sat back, crossing his arms, and let her. He watched as she measured the flour by handfuls, her fingers pale and dusted white. She added water, too much of it, creating a paste that stuck to her hands like glue. She panicked, her eyes darting to him, expecting a rebuke. He said nothing. He just watched. She added more flour, then more water. By the time she was done, the dough was a gray, overworked lump that sat heavy on the cast-iron skillet. When they came out of the oven, they were as hard as river stones. She sat at the table, staring at the biscuit on her plate. She picked it up, and it made a solid thud when she set it back down. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, biting her lip to hold back tears of frustration. Eli picked up his biscuit. He bit into it. It took some effort, and an audible crunch filled the silence. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and took a sip of coffee. "It has staying power," Eli said, his voice deadpan. "A man could carry one of these in his pocket for a week and it would never crumble. Good for long rides." Maggie looked up, her eyes widening. She saw the faint crinkle at the corner of his eyes, the shadow of a grin hidden in his beard. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, a sudden, startled sound that seemed to surprise her as much as him. "It is terrible," she admitted, pushing the plate away. "I am sorry. I have wasted your flour." "Flour can be bought," Eli said, breaking the biscuit into small pieces to soak in his stew. "Effort cannot. You did fine. Sarah, next time, less water, and do not work it like you are trying to strangle it. Treat it gently." He began to teach her. It was a slow process, hampered by her fear of doing wrong and his lack of experience in explaining things that his hands simply knew how to do. He taught her how to start the fire in the morning, the most vital task of their lives. He showed her how to arrange the kindling, how to create a draft to pull the smoke up the chimney rather than into the room. "It needs to breathe," he told her, kneeling beside her at the stove. "Fire is like a living thing. Smother it, and it dies. Give it too much air too fast, and it burns itself out. You have to find the balance." She held the match, her hand trembling. He watched her struggle to strike it against the iron. She flinched when it flared to life, dropping it. "Again," he said gently. She struck another. This time she held it, feeding it to the birch bark. When the flame caught and the stove began to tick with heat, she looked at him with a triumphant, childish delight that made his chest ache. He taught her to lace snowshoes, sitting knee to knee with her in the firelight. The rawhide was stiff, and the knots were complex. Her fingers, soft and uncalloused, struggled to pull the leather tight. "Look here," he said, slowing his own movements down. "Over, under, then through. Lock it down." She mimicked him, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. When she finally tied off a secure knot, she beamed. "I did it." "You did," Eli said. "You might make a trapper yet." It was a joke, but the compliment made her flush. She looked down at her hands, which were beginning to show the first signs of roughness. A broken nail, a small burn on her thumb, skin chapped by the dry heat of the stove. She traced the new callus on her palm, as if it were a badge of honor. As the weeks deepened, the silence between them changed texture. It became less about guarding secrets and more about a shared solitude. The evenings were long, the sun dropping behind the mountains in the early afternoon, leaving them with hours of firelight and time. They began to talk. It started in fragments. Small offerings of truth passed back and forth like the tin cup of whiskey Eli sometimes poured. Maggie spoke first. She was sitting on the buffalo robe, mending a tear in his wool coat. The wind was rattling the door latch, a sound that usually made her jump. But tonight she seemed steady. "I did not just get lost," she said softly, not looking up from her stitching. Eli, sharpening his skinning knife at the table, paused. The rasp of the stone against steel stopped. "I figured that. I ran," she said, "from San Francisco." "That is a long way to run." Eli said, "There must be something scary chasing you." "Someone," she corrected. She stuck the needle through the thick wool. He is a man who does not understand the word no. He believes that because he has money, and because our families have an agreement. He owns me, like a horse, or a parcel of land." She pulled the thread tight. "He wanted to put me in a cage, a gilded cage, perhaps, with velvet cushions and fine food. But a cage, nonetheless. I could not breathe. I felt I was disappearing." Eli watched the firelight play across her face. He saw the steel in her jaw, the anger that lay beneath the fear. "So you left the cage," Eli said. "I left everything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I took a train as far as the rails would go, and then a stagecoach, and then I just walked. I wanted to be somewhere he could not find me, somewhere the name Harrington meant nothing." She stopped, realizing she had nearly said too much. But Eli did not pounce on the name. Well, Eli said, testing the edge of his knife with his thumb. You found it. Out here. Nobody cares who you are. They only care if you can keep your word and keep yourself alive. And you? She asked, turning her gray eyes on him. You are not a man who was born to live in a box in the snow. You speak too well for it. Eli looked down at the knife. The reflection of the flames danced on the blade. I had a life once, a different one. He stood up and walked to the stove, pouring coffee he did not want, just to have something to do with his hands. My father had a ranch, he said, his voice low, roughened by the memory. Down in the valley, good grass, water. We worked there for 20 years. We built the house with our own hands. He took a sip of the black, bitter coffee. Then the silver was found in the hills above us. A syndicate from the east came in. They wanted the water rights for the mines. They offered to buy us out for pennies. My father said no. Maggie stopped sewing. She watched his back, the tension in his shoulders. They did not like no, Eli continued. They had lawyers. They had judges in their pockets. They found a flaw in the deed. A clerical error from 30 years back. A piece of paper signed by a clerk who was dead. They took it all. The judge gave us a week to vacate. That is criminal, Maggie said, her voice fierce. It is the law, Eli replied bitterly, or what passes for it when money is involved. My father died that winter. My heart gave out. I think he just died of shame. I tried to fight them, but a man with a Winchester cannot fight a corporation with a bank vault. So I left. I came up here, where the only law is the weather. The wind does not take bribes. He turned to face her. Their eyes met across the room. A bridge of shared loss spanning the distance. She was running from money that tried to own her. He was running from money that had destroyed him. I am sorry, Eli, she said. It was the first time she had used his name with such familiarity. Don't be, he said, draining his cup. Land is just dirt. A man learns to live without it. But they both knew it was a lie. The bond between them tightened a week later. Eli had gone out on snowshoes to check the nearest line of traps. He returned with 3 snowshoe hares, their white fur stark against the bloody canvas of his game bag. He dumped them on the table. Fresh meat tonight, no salt pork. Maggie looked at the dead animals. A month ago, she would have fainted. Now, she stood up and walked to the table. Show me, she said. Show you what? How to dress them. If I am to eat, I should know how to prepare it. Eli looked at her, surprised. It is messy work. Sarah, blood and guts. I am not made of glass, she said, though her face was pale. He nodded. All right, come here. He handed her his smaller knife. He stood behind her, his chest brushing her back, his arms reaching around hers to guide her hands. The cabin was cold, but the heat radiating from him was sudden and overwhelming. Maggie's breath hitched. Hold the leg here, he murmured, his voice right at her ear. Pinch the skin up, make a small cut, careful not to pierce the belly. She trembled. His hands were large, warm, and incredibly steady. He covered her small, shaking hands with his own, stabilizing the knife. Steady, he whispered. Let the blade do the work. Don't see it. Slide it. She made the cut. Warmth spilled over her fingers. Blood. She gasped and pulled back, but he held her firm. It is all right, he said. It is just blood. It washes off. She leaned back against him, seeking his stability. For a moment, the skinning was forgotten. They were frozen in a tableau of intimacy, his chin grazing the top of her head, his arms encircling her, her hands trapped beneath his on the handle of the knife. She could feel the slow, heavy beat of his heart against her shoulder blade. She could smell the scent of him, wood smoke, pine resin, and the musk of the cold. Eli, she breathed. He stiffened. The moment hung suspended, a drop of water about to fall. He could turn her around. He could kiss her. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. Then he stepped back, releasing her hands. The cold air rushed into the space between them. You got the hang of it, he said, his voice gruff. Finish that one. I will do the others. He moved to the other side of the table. putting the width of the wood between them. Maggie stood there for a moment, her hands sticky with blood, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at him, but he was focused entirely on the hair in front of him, his jaw set hard. She turned back to her task, blinking away tears she did not understand, and finished the job. The nights became the hardest part. The work of the day was done. The wind outside walled them in. They were left with nothing but the fire and each other. They sat in the chairs, Eli repairing a trap, Maggie brushing her hair. It had grown long and lustrous, restoring itself from the matted mess he had found in the snow. She sat with her back to the fire, the golden light turning the dark strands into a curtain of copper. She brushed it rhythmically, 100 strokes, a habit from a life she had left behind. Eli watched her from beneath the brim of his hat. He could not help himself. She was beautiful. Not in the way the painted women in the saloons were beautiful, but in a way that made his chest ache. She was refined, elegant even in his oversized flannel shirt and the skirt she had mended a dozen times. He looked at her hands, gripping the brush. He imagined those hands on him, not in fear, as they had been that night of the nightmare, but in desire. The thought shamed him. He looked down at his own hands, scarred, stained with grease and old dirt, the knuckles swollen from years of cold and labor. He was a man with nothing. He had a cabin that wasn't even his. It was a squatter's shack. He had a horse, 3 traps, and a rifle. He didn't know exactly what she was, but he knew she was quality. She spoke like a schoolteacher or a queen. She moved with a grace that didn't belong on a dirt floor. When the snow melted, she would leave. She would go back to her world, or find a new one that fit her. She would not stay here, with a failed rancher turned trapper. Maggie felt his eyes on her. She kept brushing, her pulse quickening. She watched him through the veil of her hair. She saw the strength in his arms, the capability in his hands. She saw a man who had saved her life not for reward, but because it was who he was. She wanted to cross the distance. She wanted to sit at his feet and rest her head on his knee, but fear held her back. Not fear of him, that had vanished weeks ago, but fear of herself, fear of being wrong, fear that he saw her only as a burden, a stray dog he had to feed until the weather broke, and deeper, the fear that she was broken, that the man she ran from had taken something from her that she could never get back. The air between them crackled, thick with words unsaid. "Fire's dying," Eli would say, standing up abruptly. "Yes," she would reply, stopping the brush. "Good night, Eli." "Night, Sarah." And the moment would pass, leaving them both lonely in the same room. Then the roof began to fail. It happened during a storm that rivaled the first one. The snow had been falling heavy and wet for 2 days, a concrete slurry that piled feet deep on the sod and timber roof. They were eating supper when a loud crack echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Dust and bark rained down from the ceiling logs. Eli looked up, his eyes narrowing. Another crack, louder this time. The main beam, a massive lodgepole pine, groaned. "Get under the table," Eli commanded. He was on his feet instantly. "What is it?" Maggie cried, dropping her spoon. "The weight. It is too much. The beam is splitting. Get under the table, now!" He did not wait for her to discuss. He grabbed his heavy coat and the wooden shovel he kept by the door. "I have to clear it," he yelled over the sound of the wind. "You cannot go out there," Maggie screamed, grabbing his arm. "It is a whiteout. You will be blown away. If I do not, the roof comes down and crushes us both. Stay put." He shoved the door open. The wind hit him like a physical blow, knocking him back a step. He lowered his head and forced his way out, slamming the door behind him. Maggie scrambled under the heavy oak table. She hugged her knees, listening. She could hear his boots thumping on the roof logs. She heard the scrape of the shovel. Above her, the wood groaned again, a sickening, splintering sound. Outside, Eli was fighting for his life. The roof was slick with ice beneath the fresh snow. The wind tore at him, trying to peel him off the structure. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He shoveled blindly. heaving great loads of heavy snow over the edge, his muscles screaming. He stepped toward the chimney to clear the drift there. His boot hit a patch of ice. His feet went out from under him. He slipped, scrabbling for purchase. He hit the edge of the roof and went over. He managed to hook one arm around the protruding end of a rafter as he fell. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder. He dangled there, 20 feet above the ground, suspended in the howling void. "Eli!" He heard her scream from inside the cabin. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He gritted his teeth. He swung his legs, finding purchase on the rough logs of the wall. He roared with effort and hauled himself up, hand over hand, until he rolled back onto the roof. He lay there for a second, gasping, the snow melting on his face. He got up. He finished the job. When he came back inside, he was covered in snow, shaking from adrenaline and cold. He latched the door and leaned against it, his chest heaving. Maggie was out from under the table before he could move. She ran to him. She did not stop. She threw herself against his chest, wrapping her arms around his snow-covered coat, burying her face in his neck. "I thought you fell," she sobbed. "I heard you slip. I thought you were gone." Eli stood frozen, his arms hanging at his sides. She was shaking uncontrollably. She was warm, so warm against the cold that clung to him. "I slipped," he rasped. "I caught myself." She pulled back, her hands flying to his face. She touched his cold cheeks, his beard, her thumbs tracing the line of his jaw. Her eyes were wide, wet with tears, and stripped of all defenses. There was no hiding now. The look on her face was not gratitude. It was love. It was a desperate, terrifying love born of the fear of loss. "Do not ever do that again," she whispered fiercely. "Do not you dare die on me, Eli Walker." Eli looked at her. The heat of her hands on his face burned him. He raised his own hand, covering hers. He cupped her palm against his cheek, closing his eyes for a single, stolen second. He leaned into her touch. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to draw her into him and never let go. But the voice in his head was louder than the wind. "She is a millionaire's daughter. You are a dirt-poor trapper. She is scared and grateful. Do not mistake it for want." He opened his eyes. He gently pulled her hand away from his face. "I am all right, Sarah," he said, his voice flat, closing the door on the moment. "The roof will hold." He stepped around her, moving to the stove to warm his hands. Maggie stood in the center of the room, her hand still suspended in the air where his face had been. She felt the rejection like a slap. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy with the weight of his withdrawal and her exposed heart. She lowered her hand slowly. She turned to look at his back, rigid and unyielding. "Yes," she said quietly to the empty room. "The roof will hold," but she knew, as she watched him, that something else had broken. The first sound of the new world was water. For weeks, their lives had been scored by the shriek of the wind and the crackle of the stove. Now, a new symphony has emerged. It was the sound of dripping, a persistent, rhythmic plink, plink, plink from the eaves as the mountain of snow on the roof finally began to yield to a pale, hesitant sun. The snow, which had been a suffocating blanket, was receding, pulling back like a dirty tide, revealing the bruised and sodden earth beneath. The air, once sharp and sterile, now carried a new scent, damp soil, the sharp tang of unfrozen pine, a promise of mud. The thaw had begun. Eli stood at the open cabin door, a position he had not been able to take in 2 months. The air that touched his face was not a slap, but a cool, damp caress. He could see the ridgeline to the east, no longer a white blur, but a hard, dark line of rock and timber. The world was returning, and with it, the demands of a life beyond mere survival. "The snow is breaking," he said, his voice quiet in the new, dripping silence. "The trail to town will be a river of mud, but it should be passable." Maggie, who was scrubbing the tin plates at the table, went still. Her hands, red and chapped, froze in the basin of gray water. "Town?" she asked, her voice small. "I am out of everything," Eli said, turning back to her. He gestured to the nearly empty flour sack, the coffee tin that held only a few dark beans, the small leather pouch of bullets that felt perilously light. Out of flour, coffee, shot, and salt, a man cannot live on venison and hope. He began pulling on his heavy coat, the one she had mended. He checked the action on his rifle. His movements were practical, his mind already on the hard, 2-day ride to Crow's Crossing. Maggie's heart began to hammer against her ribs. It was not a request. He was leaving. He was leaving her. The walls of the cabin, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage again. The nightmare she lived with, the one of being abandoned, of being left behind, rose up in her throat. "I am coming with you," she said. Eli stopped, one arm in his sleeve. He turned to look at her, a deep frown creasing his brow. "No." "Yes," she insisted, her voice gaining a frantic edge. She dried her hands on her skirt, her movements jerky. "You cannot leave me here. What if the snow returns? What if you do not come back?" "I will come back, Sarah. It is a supply run, not a funeral," he said, his voice flat. He was annoyed. The trip was hard enough for one man, let alone for a woman with soft hands and mended boots. "The ride is 30 miles. 30 miles of mud and slush. You are not fit for it." "I am fit," she cried, and her fear made her sound angry. "I will not stay. I will not be left. I will walk if I have to, but I am not staying in this cabin alone." He stared at her for a long, hard moment. He saw the genuine, high-pitched terror in her gray eyes, the same terror he had seen the night of her nightmare. It was not just a whim. She was not afraid of him leaving. She was afraid of being left. It was a distinction he did not fully understand, but he could not deny the panic he saw in her. He let out a long, weary sigh, the breath pluming in the cold air. "Damn it!" He went to a wooden chest in the corner, one that had belonged to his mother, and dug inside. He pulled out a dark, shapeless wool bonnet. "It will be cold. Buster is not built for two. We will have to ride and walk. And you will do exactly as I say. You understand?" A wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over her. She nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "I understand." Crow's Crossing was not a town. It was an argument with the wilderness, and the wilderness was winning. It was 2 muddy tracks that served as a main street, lined with 6 or 7 false-fronted buildings that leaned in on themselves, as if for warmth. There was a saloon, a livery, a blacksmith's forge that was dark, and the combined general store and post office. The entire settlement smelled of mud, manure, and sour whiskey. The ride had been brutal, just as Eli had promised. They had ridden, then walked, then ridden again, Maggie's legs burning from the unfamiliar strain, her borrowed bonnet doing little to keep the wet wind from her face. Eli had been silent for most of the trip, his frustration a palpable thing. When they finally rode down the main street, Buster's hooves making sucking sounds in the mud, the town seemed to stop and stare. A few hardened trappers, their faces hidden by beards and grime, stopped their game of mending tack outside the livery. A woman in a faded calico dress, hauling a bucket of water, paused and narrowed her eyes. Maggie, perched on the back of the saddle with her arms around Eli's waist, felt the stares like a physical assault. She was wearing her own blue dress, now scarred and mended, and the plain, ugly bonnet. But it did not matter. She knew, with a sinking heart, that she could not hide. "They are all looking," she whispered, her voice tight. "This is Crow's Crossing," Eli muttered back, not turning. "They look at anything that moves. Keep your head down." He dismounted in front of the You Bet merchandise post and reached up for her. His hands were rough as he spanned her waist and lifted her down. Her legs, stiff and cold, nearly buckled under her. She stood beside him, trying to make herself small. She heard a low whistle from the saloon porch, followed by a gruff voice. "Walker, you old dog. Where'd you dig that one up? She's a damn sight prettier than that last mule you had." Eli went rigid. His hand, which had been unlashing his pack, moved to rest on the butt of the pistol at his hip. "Mind your mouth, Silas," Eli said. his voice a low growl that carried across the street. "This is my wife, Sarah." The word wife hung in the air, sharp and unbelievable. Maggie looked at him in shock. The trapper, Silas, held up his hands, a mocking grin splitting his beard. "Wife, well, congratulations. Did not figure you for the marrying kind." The woman with the bucket sniffed loudly. "Wife, humph. Looks more like Helena parlor trade to me. Too soft." "Eli," Maggie whispered, tugging on his sleeve, her face burning. "Please." Eli ignored them all. He shouldered his pack of meager furs and pushed open the store's door, a small bell jangling overhead. He nudged her inside ahead of him. The store was dark and smelled of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and mice. A pot-bellied stove in the center gave off a stifling heat. The proprietor, a man named Henderson with a bald head and sleeve garters, looked up from his ledger. "Walker," he said, his voice flat, devoid of welcome. "Thought the wolves might have got you?" "Not yet, Henderson," Eli said, dumping the fur pelts on the counter. "I need supplies." Henderson picked up the pelts one by one. His fingers prodded and pulled, seeking flaws. "Poor. The weather's been hard on them. Traps must have frozen. I can give you $10. Store credit." "For the lot." "They are worth 20. And you know it," Eli said. "They are worth what I say they are worth in my store," Henderson replied, not looking up. $10. Take it or leave it. The market's down." Eli's jaw tightened. Maggie watched his hand clench into a fist on the countertop. She saw in that one tight gesture a universe of his frustration, his poverty, his pride ground into the dust by this smug man in a clean shirt. "Fine," Eli spat. "Flour, 20 pounds, coffee, salt, a box of shells, .44, 40, and a pound of hard candy." Henderson raised an eyebrow at the last item. "Getting a sweet tooth?" "Just get it," Eli said, while Henderson slowly measured out the supplies. Maggie felt a desperate need to get away from the counter, away from the humiliation of the transaction. She, who could buy this entire miserable town with a single signature, was watching the man who had saved her life barter for flour. The shame of it was physical illness. She drifted toward the back of the store, where a small, barred window marked the post office. A few notices were tacked to the wall: a bounty for a wolf, a notice of a sheriff's auction for a failed homestead, and one printed on fine white paper, not the rough newsprint of the others. Her blood turned to ice. She did not need to get closer to read the name. She already knew, but she moved forward anyway, as if pulled by a rope. Reward, $1,000, $1,000. More money than this entire town would see in a year. For information leading to the safe return of Margaret Harrington, daughter of Silas Harrington, San Francisco, last seen. It had a drawing, a sketch of her. It was a poor likeness, capturing her finery but not her face. But it was enough. Age 20, gray eyes, dark hair, speaks with refined. She could not breathe. The walls of the store, piled high with goods, seemed to be toppling in on her. She was a piece of paper on a wall, a $1,000 prize. She was not Sarah Smith. She was not a person. She was Margaret Harrington, a missing piece of property. She turned around, her back to the poster, pressing her hands against the rough wall to steady herself. Her heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against her ribs. "Sarah?" Eli's voice was close. He had finished his trade. He was standing 3 feet away, holding the sacks of supplies. His eyes were not angry anymore. They were full of a sharp, sudden concern. "What is it? You look like you just saw a ghost." "Nothing," she whispered, her voice sounding strange and thin. She tried to smile, but her lips were numb. It is so warm here. I think I am faint." Eli looked past her, his gaze sweeping the wall she had been staring at. He read the wolf bounty, the auction notice. His eyes flicked over the reward poster, but the name Harrington meant nothing to him. He was looking for a threat, and a poster about a missing rich girl from San Francisco was not a threat. It was just another sad story. He looked back at her. He did not believe her. Not entirely. He saw the lie, the tremor in her hands. But this was not the place. "All right," he said, his voice softening. "We are leaving. Henderson. Put it on the account. Account's full. Walker. Put it on the account," Eli repeated. And there was a new, cold edge to his voice that made the storekeeper shrug and nod. Eli guided Maggie out into the mud, his hand firmly on her elbow. The ride home was worse than the ride in. The tension that had been a thin wire between them was now a heavy, sodden blanket. Eli was suspicious, and Maggie was drowning in guilt. She should have told him. In the store. She should have just pointed to the poster and said, "That is me," but she could not. She had seen him trade his dignity for $10 worth of flour. How could she tell him she was worth 1,000? How could she tell him that the world he fought for every day was, to her family, nothing more than pocket change? She looked at his back as he rode, at the strong, straight line of his shoulders, and she hated herself. They reached the cabin late the next day. The silence between them was complete. Eli unsaddled Buster, and Maggie went inside the small, dark cabin. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a lie. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on the cot, listening to Eli's steady breathing on the floor. He had not said a word to her since Crow's Crossing. He had just coexisted, and the silence was far more painful than his anger. Just before dawn, she heard a sound, a low, scratching sound at the door. She sat bolt upright. Eli? He was already moving. He was not a man who slept. He was a man who rested, and he was on his feet in a single, fluid motion, his rifle in his hand. The scratching came again, bolder this time, followed by a high, yipping bark. "Coyote," Eli whispered. Moving to the window, he peered out into the gray, pre-dawn light. "A bold one. Smells the meat." "It cannot get in, can it?" Maggie asked, pulling the blanket to her chin. "Not unless it learns to use a latch," Eli said. "But it is stalking the cabin. It will take the hares I have hung. I have had enough of thieves." He moved to the door, his movement sure and silent in the dark. He stood beside it, his rifle held at his side. He was waiting. Maggie watched him, her heart pounding. He was a shadow of patience and sudden, contained violence. The scratching stopped. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then, Eli wrenched the door open. The coyote was there, not 3 feet from the step, its lips curled back in a snarl, its eyes yellow and mad with hunger. It lunged. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. It was not a boom, but a crack, a sharp, ear-splitting explosion that filled the cabin with a smell of sulfur. The coyote was thrown backward, a dark heap in the muddy snow. The echo died. Eli stood in the doorway, the rifle smoking, the gray light of dawn silhouetting him. He lowered the rifle and turned back inside, kicking the door shut. The silence that followed was heavier than before. "It is done," he said. He started to lean the rifle against the wall, but he hissed in pain as his hand brushed the wood. "What is it?" Maggie asked, her nerves raw. "Did it hurt you?" "Nothing," he said, shaking his hand. "Caught it on the door frame when the gun kicked. A splinter." He was wrong. It was not a splinter. In the dim light, she saw a dark line of blood welling up on the back of his hand. A long, shallow gash from the jagged edge of the latch. "Let me see," she said, scrambling off the cot. "It is just a scratch. Sarah, leave it." "No," she said, her voice fierce. She grabbed his wrist. His hand was so large, so warm, and the blood on it was so red. She pulled him toward the fire, her hands trembling. All the fear from the post office, all the guilt from the lie, all the terror from the gunshot, it all coalesced into a single, frantic need to fix something. "Sit," she commanded. He sat, surprised by her vehemence. She grabbed the water basin and a clean rag, her movements jerky. She knelt at his feet and gently, so gently, began to clean the wound. He watched her. Her head was bent, her dark hair falling forward, hiding her face, her hands, which had been so soft and useless, were now chapped and capable, and they were shaking. "You are trembling," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am fine," she whispered, though a tear dripped from her chin onto his hand. "Sarah," he said, and he put his other hand under her chin, tilting her face up. Her eyes were a mess. She was awash in tears, her face pale, her lips trembling. She was not crying for the coyote or for his hand. She was crying because of it. "I am so sorry," she whispered, but he did not know what she was apologizing for. He just looked at her, his rough thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek. And in that moment, she was not a rich girl, and he was not a poor trapper. They were just two people, lost in the wilderness, who had saved each other. She was still holding his wounded hand. She looked at his mouth, and then back to his eyes. And then, before her own mind could stop her, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a clumsy, desperate kiss, salty with her tears. She expected him to pull away, to be angry. He did not. For 1 second, he froze. Then, with a low sound, a groan that came from deep in his chest, his other hand came up, not to her chin, but to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had been starved for weeks. It was a kiss of loneliness and longing, of shared fear and unspoken desire. It tasted of coffee and gunpowder, of snow and wood smoke. He pulled her up from the floor, not breaking the kiss, and she came to him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. The weeks of tension, of stolen glances and unspoken words, ignited. The air between them, which had been thick with suspicion, was now thick with a desperate, sudden heat. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his mouth still on hers, and carried her a few feet from the chair to the buffalo robe in front of the fire. He laid her down, and she pulled him with her. They fumbled with clothes, their movements urgent, desperate. This was not the refined, polite world she had come from. This was raw and real. His hands were rough, and they were everywhere. Her silk and his flannel, the mended and the new, were torn away. He stopped for a second, his body hovering over hers in the firelight, his eyes asking a question she had already answered. She reached up, her own hands no longer trembling, and pulled him down. It was a moment of heat and of safety. It was the sound of the wind and the crackle of the fire and the feel of a strong, warm body covering hers. It was an anchor in the storm, a place to finally be still. Later, they lay tangled in the blankets, the fire painting their bodies in shades of red and gold. The cabin was quiet. Maggie felt a tear slide from the corner of her eye, and then another, a moment of perfect, profound connection. And it was built on a foundation of lies. A quiet sob shook her. Eli, who had been drifting in a daze, felt her tremor. He propped himself up on one elbow, his face creased with concern. "What is it? Did I hurt you?" She shook her head, turning her face into his shoulder to muffle the sound. No, you did not hurt me." "Then what?" he asked, his voice rough with confusion. She just cried, silent, racking sobs. He did not understand. He did not know what to say. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He held her. He pulled the blankets tighter around them both, and held her as she wept, his hand stroking her hair. "I am here," he whispered, his lips against her temple. "It is all right. I am here." She clung to him, her fingers digging into his back. She held him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. She waited until the sobs subsided, and then she whispered into the warm skin of his chest, her voice muffled and desperate. "Don't ever leave me, Eli. Promise me. Whatever happens, whatever you find out, promise me you will not leave me." "I will not leave you, Sarah," he said, his voice a low vow. "I am not going anywhere." He held her until she fell into an exhausted sleep. Eli woke first, as he always did, in the gray, cold light of dawn. He woke with a sense of peace he had not felt in 10 years. His body was warm. His heart was full. He turned, a smile on his face. to look at the woman sleeping beside him. But she was not there. The buffalo robe was empty. The cot was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He sat up, the cold air hitting his bare skin. "Sarah!" He saw her. The cabin door was ajar, and she was outside. He pulled on his pants and his boots, his heart pounding, and grabbed a blanket. He pushed the door open. She was sitting on the log where he chopped wood, her knees drawn to her chest. She was wearing his flannel shirt, the one she had mended. She was staring at the line of mountains, now purple and pink with the sunrise. "You will freeze," he said, his voice rough. She did not turn. She did not look at him. He walked over and draped the heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. She clutched it, but she did not look at him. "Sarah?" he asked, sitting on the log beside her, the joy of the morning curdling into ash. "What is wrong?" She was 1,000 miles away. The woman he had held, the woman who had kissed him with such desperate passion, was gone. In her place was this cold, distant stranger, staring at the horizon. "It is beautiful," she said, her voice a monotone. "The sunrise." "What is wrong?" he asked again. She turned her face to him. Her eyes were empty, haunted. She had given him everything but the one thing that mattered. And she knew, as she looked at his strong, honest, worried face, that when he knew the truth, he would hate her, and she could not bear it. "Nothing," she lied. "I am just cold." The world was changing. The great white silence of the winter was broken, replaced by a million new sounds. It was a world of water, a world of noise. The snow receded from the high country meadows, revealing the matted brown grass of the previous year, which was already giving way to spears of bright, impossible green. The rivers, which had been frozen veins of iron, were now swollen, angry torrents of gray, churning water, carrying with them the debris of the thaw. The mud was ankle-deep, a thick, sucking morass that made travel a misery. But the air was warm. For the first time in 4 months, Eli could stand outside his cabin without his coat, the sun a welcome weight on his shoulders. Spring had not just melted the snow, it had melted the walls of their prison. But with that freedom came a new and terrible vulnerability. The isolation that had protected them was gone. The world was flooding in, and Maggie felt as though she were standing on a disappearing island. The morning it happened. The air was clear and sharp, the sky a high, cloudless blue. Eli was outside, the sound of his axe splitting firewood a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the rush of the nearby creek. He was shirtless. His back, which she had only ever seen in firelight, was broad and brown, the muscles moving smoothly under his skin. Maggie was hanging the heavy buffalo robes over a line he had strung, beating the dust and the smell of winter out of them. It was a simple, domestic act, and it filled her with a quiet, fragile peace. Then she heard it. It was a sound that did not belong. Not the axe, not the river, not the call of a jay. It was the jingle of harness, and the soft, heavy tread of horses in mud. It was coming from the ridge. Eli heard it too. The axe stopped mid-swing. He did not turn. He simply stood, frozen, listening. "Get inside," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with a cold, sharp urgency. Maggie's heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs. "Eli, inside, now!" He turned, his face no longer the relaxed face of a man chopping wood, but the hard, guarded mask of the trapper. He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall. "Get under the cot. Stay there. Do not make a sound. Do not breathe. You understand me?" "Who is it?" she whispered, her hands flying to her throat. "It does not matter. Go!" She ran. She scrambled into the cabin, the smell of dust and fear thick in her nostrils. She did not hesitate. She threw herself onto the hard-packed dirt floor and slid under the low cot, pulling a spare blanket over the edge to hide her body. She was in darkness, her face pressed against the cold earth, her heart so loud she was sure they would hear it. She was being hunted again. The peace was over. Eli stood in front of his cabin, the rifle held loosely in the crook of his arm, his thumb resting on the hammer, He watched them come. There were 2 of them. They were not trappers, and they were not locals. They rode expensive horses, a matched set of bays, not the tough mountain ponies the locals used. They wore store-bought dusters, dark trousers, and hats that had not seen a hard winter. Their holsters were new, their pistols gleaming. They looked clean. It was the cleanness that worried Eli most. They were city men, and they were armed for a purpose. They reined in their horses about 20 feet from him, stopping just out of pistol range, just inside rifle range. The man in the lead, older, with a gray-streaked beard and cold, blue eyes, nodded. "Morning," the man said. His voice was educated. "Morning," Eli replied. He did not move. "Tough winter," the man said, his eyes scanning the cabin, the lean-to, the pelt-stretching racks. He was assessing. "They usually are," Eli said. "My name is Pinkerton," the man said. Though Eli knew it was a lie, it was a profession, not a name. "My associate and I are looking for someone. A young woman. Not much for women up here," Eli said. "Just the wind, and she is a cruel partner." The second man, younger, with a mean mouth, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "We are not here for your homespun philosophy, trapper. We are looking for a runaway." The lead man, Pinkerton, held up a hand, silencing his partner. He reached into his coat. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. The man moved slowly. He pulled out not a gun, but a folded piece of paper. The reward poster. "We are looking for a young lady from San Francisco," the man said, his voice reasonable. "Answers to the name of Margaret Harrington. Rich girl. Seems she took a notion to see the wilderness. Her family is concerned. They are offering a very substantial reward for her safe return." He unfolded the paper. Eli could see the sketch from where he stood. It was a poor likeness, but it was her. It was Sarah. "Has anyone seen this? Dark hair, gray eyes, speaks like a lady," the man said. Under the cot, Maggie had her fist stuffed in her mouth to keep from screaming. She could hear every word. A substantial reward. They were not here to save her. They were here to collect her. Eli looked at the poster. He let his eyes linger on it for a long, slow moment. He looked back at the man. He shook his head. "Never seen her." "You sure?" the younger man sneered, his eyes flicking to the cabin door. "A pretty thing like that, a man would remember, especially after a long winter alone." "I am sure," Eli said, and his voice dropped a full octave, a note of granite scraping against steel. "It has been just me in the snow since October. No one's come by. No one's left. I would know." "We heard a rumor in Crow's Crossing," Pinkerton pressed. His cold eyes locked on Eli's. "Man by the name of Walker. Came in for supplies a few weeks back. Had a woman with him. The air went dead." Under the bed, Maggie stopped breathing. Eli's face did not change. He was a stone wall. "My wife, Sarah, she came up with me last fall before the snow. She is shy. Does not like strangers." He gestured with his head. "She is inside, if you want to ask her." It was a bluff, and a brilliant one. He was inviting them in, an act of such casual confidence that it had to be the truth. Pinkerton studied him. He looked at the cabin, a one-room, dirt-floored hovel. He looked at Eli, a poor, hard-scrabble squatter in torn flannel, holding a rifle. He could not, in his wildest imaginings, picture Margaret Harrington, the silver heiress of San Francisco, living in this hole, and he certainly could not picture her being this man's wife. The idea was too absurd. The rumor in town was wrong. "No," Pinkerton said, folding the paper. "That will not be necessary. If you say you have not seen her, you have not seen her." He pulled on his reins. "If you do, there is $1,000 waiting for you. Just send word to the U.S. Marshal in Helena." "So, I will keep that in mind," Eli said. They turned their horses. "Good day to you," Pinkerton said. They rode off, back the way they came, their horses' hooves quiet in the mud. Eli did not move. He stood, his rifle at his side, and watched them until they were small, dark specks on the ridge, and then gone. He let out a breath he had been holding for 5 minutes. He turned and went into the cabin. He shut the door, the heavy bar falling into place with a wooden thud that echoed in the silence. The cabin was dark, the air thick with tension. "They are gone." He heard a scuffling sound. Maggie slid out from under the cot. She was covered in dust and cobwebs, her hair wild, her face as pale as the snow that had just melted. She was shaking, a fine, violent tremor. She looked at him, her gray eyes wide and terrified. The lie, the one he had told for her, hung between them, a living, breathing thing. That night was a torment. They did not speak of it. Eli went back to his chores, his movements short and angry. Maggie tried to cook, but her hands shook so badly she dropped the pot of beans. They ate in a silence that was heavier and more suffocating than the winter had ever been. The intimacy they had shared, the fragile peace they had built, felt like a joke. Eli sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. The shing, shing, shing of the whetstone, the only sound. Maggie sat on the cot, her hands clenched in her lap. She could not bear it. The silence, the lie, the look in his eyes when he had seen that poster. "They were looking for me," she whispered. The stone stilled. Eli did not look up. "I know. Margaret Harrington," she said, the name tasting like ash on her tongue. "That is my name." He set the knife and the stone down on the table, very carefully. He turned in his chair and looked at her. His face was a mask, his eyes impossible to read. "And," he said, "my family. We are from San Francisco. We are not poor. Eli." "I figured that," he said, his voice flat. The velvet coat, the silk, the hands that had never seen lye soap. I did not know how to tell you," she stammered. "At first, I was sick, and then I was scared, and then you were just lying," he finished for her. "No," she cried, standing up. "It was not a lie. It was a way to survive. My name is not a name. Eli. It is a property deed. My father, the man he tried to force me to marry. They do not see me. They see an asset, a way to merge two fortunes. Alistair, the man I was supposed to marry. He would have locked me up. He told me he would. He said he would break me." She was pacing now, the small cabin barely able to contain her energy, her hands twisting in front of her. I ran until I had nowhere left to run, and I fell in the snow. And you found me, and you did not ask what I was worth. You did not ask who my father was. You fed me. You mended my boots. You kept me safe." She stopped in front of him, her eyes pleading, awash in tears. "In this cabin, I was not Margaret Harrington. I was not $1,000 reward. I was just Sarah, and she was real for the first time in my life. I was real." Eli listened. He listened to the whole terrible story. The silver fortune, the powerful fiancé, the escape, and with every word, he felt something inside him grow colder, harder. He had been a fool. He had been played for a fool. While he was struggling to trade pelts for $10 worth of flour, she was a millionaire. The word itself felt obscene. He remembered the humiliation at Henderson's store, her watching him beg for credit. He remembered his own stupid, tender feelings, his belief that she was some broken, lost thing like him. All his insecurities, all the bile from losing his land to the mining syndicate, all the deep-seated rage he had at them, the rich, the powerful, the people who moved the world with a signature and left men like him in the dust. It all came boiling to the surface, and she was one of them. He stood up, his chair scraping violently on the floor. He was taller than her, and for the first time, he used his size to intimidate her. "One of them," he said, his voice a low, bitter growl. "What?" she whispered, taking a step back. "You are one of them," he spat. "The people in carriages who look down at the dirt, the people who own the judges and the banks and the syndicates." The people who took my land and killed my father. No, Eli, that is not— Do not lie to me, he roared. And she flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. Not anymore. All winter. You let me feed you and clothe you and sleep on the floor while you took my bed. You let me feel sorry for you. Was it a game? Was it a good story to tell your rich friends back in San Francisco? I spent the winter living with a savage in a mud hut. It was so rustic. How can you say that? She choked, the tears coming fast now. How can you think that? I love you. Love? He laughed, a short, ugly sound. You do not know the first thing about it. You know about using people. That is what your kind does. You used me for a warm bed and a bodyguard. You let me lie to those men, let me put my life on the line for you, and all the while you were a Harrington. You made me a liar, and you made me a fool. I never wanted to lie, she screamed back, her own anger rising to meet him. I wanted to be safe. I wanted to be seen, and you did. You saw me, the real me, and now you are doing the same thing they all do. You are not looking at me. You are looking at my money. You are looking at my name. You are the one who is blinded. Eli, you are the one who is just like them. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, his chest heaving, his face dark with a rage that was so deep it was indistinguishable from pain. He could not look at her. He could not be in the same room. He grabbed his coat and his rifle. He ripped the door open. Eli, no, she cried, running after him. Do not go, please, Eli. He shoved her back, not hard, but firmly, pushing her out of his way. Stay away from me, he growled. He went to the lean-to, threw the saddle on Buster, his movements jerky and violent. Maggie stood in the doorway of the cabin, sobbing, the cold rain starting to fall. Eli, please, it is raining. Where are you going? He swung himself into the saddle. He looked down at her, his face a mask of cold fury and betrayal. Away from you, he said. He kicked Buster into a gallop, riding hard up the trail toward the ridge. Away from the cabin, away from the lie, away from the woman who had broken the one part of him he thought was still safe. He needed space. He needed wind. He needed to be alone, the way he had been before her. Maggie stood in the mud and watched him go until he was out of sight. The cabin behind her, her sanctuary, was now cold and empty. He was gone. She had lost him. She sank to her knees in the mud, her face in her hands, and wept. He was gone for 3 days, 3 days of wind and cold rain, 3 days of a gut-wrenching, soul-crushing silence. Eli stayed on the ridge, huddled under a rock overhang, letting the misery wash over him. He was a proud man, and his pride had been shattered. He felt like a fool, a bumpkin, a plaything, but as the rage cooled, something else settled in, a hollow, aching cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He kept seeing her face. Not her face when she told him the truth, but her face in the firelight, her eyes wide with fear during her nightmare. He remembered her hands, small and trembling, as he taught her to skin the rabbit. He remembered her cry of terror when he slipped from the roof. He remembered the feel of her in his arms, her body pressed against his, the soft, desperate whisper, "Don't ever leave me," and his promise, "I will not leave you." Sarah. He was a man who kept his word, and he had broken it. He was judging her for being born rich, just as Henderson and the syndicate men judged him for being born poor. He was doing the very thing he despised. He was letting the money, the class, the dirt of the world, define them. She had not lied to be cruel. She had lied to be safe. She had not come to him for his non-existent money. She had come to him for his very real protection, and he had given it. Until now. The thought of her, alone in that cabin, scared, heartbroken. The thought of those two men, Pinkerton and his partner, coming back. On the third morning, he kicked Buster into a run, his heart pounding with a new, terrible fear. He rode back down the muddy trail, his mind racing. He would apologize. He would beg, if he had to. He did not care about the money. He did not care about the name. He burst into the cabin, shouting her name. "Sarah! Maggie! I am back!" The cabin was cold. The fire was dead. His blood ran cold. He looked around. his eyes wild. Her velvet bag was gone. The buffalo robe she had slept under was folded neatly on the cot. She was gone. No, he whispered. He had been too late. He had been a proud, stupid fool, and he had lost her. He ran outside, yelling her name, his voice raw with panic. Maggie! Maggie! He scanned the mud, desperate for tracks. He saw them, small, booted footprints, leading away from the cabin, heading toward the river. He ran, his long legs eating up the ground, his coat flapping behind him. The rain, which had been a drizzle, began to fall in earnest. A cold, driving, spring storm. He found her. She was not far. She was huddled by the riverbank, under a small rock overhang, not far from the very spot where he had found her months ago. She had built a small, pathetic fire that was sputtering in the rain. Her bag was at her feet. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, her shoulders shaking with cold and misery. He stopped, his heart breaking. She looked up at the sound of his approach. Her face was pale, her eyes raw and swollen. She looked like the half-frozen, lost thing he had first seen. But this was worse. This time, he had been the one to break her. Maggie, he said, his voice raw. She flinched, scrambling to her feet, her hands raised as if to ward him off. Go away, she whispered. I am leaving. You do not have to worry. I will not bother you any more. Bother me, he said, his voice thick. He took a step, and then another, walking through the pouring rain until he was standing right in front of her. He was soaked in seconds. I came back, he said, his voice breaking. The cabin, it was cold. It was empty. I thought... He could not say it. He reached out and touched her face, his rough thumb brushing the rain and tears from her cheek. I am a fool. Maggie, he whispered, his eyes searching hers. A proud, stubborn, stupid fool. I do not care about the money. I do not care about your father, or your name, or San Francisco. He pulled her to him, his hands gentle but firm. I was angry, not at you. I was angry at them. In a world that lets men with money take whatever they want, I was angry. And I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had nothing to offer you but a cold floor and venison stew. He put his forehead against hers. But you are not them. You are the only good thing that has ever felt real in my entire damn life. And I love you. I do not care what your name is. She was looking up at him, her eyes wide, searching his face, desperate to believe. And then she surged up, her cold hands locking around his neck, and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of absolution, of desperation, of a truth so deep it hurt. It was rain, and mud, and cold, and the unshakable warmth of two lost souls finding their way back. They clung to each other, the storm raging around them, a mirror of the one that had just passed. She pulled back, her lips still brushing his, her voice a small, trembling whisper against his skin. Even if I am rich, Eli, even if I am Margaret Harrington. He closed his eyes, holding her tighter, as if he could absorb her into himself. I do not care if you are rich, he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. I do not care if you are royalty. I just care that you are here. The rain that had washed away Eli's anger had also washed away Maggie's fear. In its place, a hard, clear resolve had settled in, as solid and unyielding as the granite of the mountains. She would not hide. She would not be Sarah, the trembling, haunted refugee. And she would not be Margaret Harrington, the $1,000 piece of property. She would be Maggie, the woman who had survived a blizzard and found a home on a dirt floor in the arms of a man who saw her. Not her name, but that required a fight. Not a fight of running, but a fight of standing still. We have to go to Helena, she said. 2 days later, they were back in the cabin. The sun was out, and the world was alive. She was packing, not her velvet bag, but a simple canvas sack. Eli, who was cleaning his rifle, looked up, his movement stilling. Helena, what for? I told you, those men will come back. Eli, she said, her voice firm, and more will come after them. The Pinkertons are like hounds. They do not give up the scent. I have been running my whole life, from my father, from Alistair, from my own name. I am done. I will not have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. I will not have you lie to me." She walked over to him, took the rifle from his hands, and set it against the wall. She took his scarred hands on her own. "I am going to fight them, not with a gun, with a lawyer." The ride to Helena was a journey into a different world. It was a 3-day trek, leaving the high country for the broad, bustling valleys of the territorial capital. Helena was not a camp like Crow's Crossing. It was a city built on gold, a sprawling, arrogant, noisy testament to the fortunes ripped from the earth. Brick buildings stood next to log shanties. Silk-hatted bankers shared the muddy boardwalks with grizzled prospectors, and the air hummed with the sound of commerce and ambition. Eli was a shadow. He rode beside her, Buster's head low, his own hat pulled down. He, who was a king in his own small, silent kingdom, was nobody here. He was just another drifter, his buckskins out of place, his poverty a visible stain. Men looked at Maggie, at her fine, pale face and the way she held herself, and then looked at him with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. "She is with you?" a man outside the assayer's office said, loud enough to be heard. Eli's hand went to his pistol, but Maggie's hand found his first. "It does not matter, Eli," she said, her voice a low, steady anchor. "None of them matter." They found a lawyer, a small, dusty office over a bakery, run by a man named Alabaster Finn, who had kind, tired eyes and a waistcoat stained with ink. Maggie told him her story. She did not weep. She did not embellish. She laid out the facts. Her name, her family, her flight, her desire to be free. Mr. Finn listened, his fingers steepled, his gaze moving from Maggie's intense, pale face to the silent, watchful giant who stood by the door, his hand never far from his gun. "You are in a difficult position. Miss Harrington," Finn said, when she had finished. "Legally, you are of age. You are free to do as you please. But practically, your father is Silas Harrington. His name carries weight, even here, his silver mines in Nevada, his new railroad ventures. He is not a man to be trifled with. And this engagement was a business transaction," Maggie said, her voice cold. "I never agreed to it. But you did not formally refuse it. You ran to them. You are not a person. You are a breach of contract." "Then what do I do?" she asked. "You stop running," Finn said. "You make your stand. We will send a letter, by telegraph, to your father in San Francisco. We will state that you are alive, you are well, and that you are under legal protection. We will state that you consider the engagement to Mr. Alistair Crown null and void, and that any further attempts to retrieve you by force will be met with legal action and public exposure." "Public exposure," Maggie repeated, tasting the words. "Yes, I like that." They left the office and took a room at a boarding house, a clean but threadbare place on the edge of town. They waited. For 2 days, an uneasy peace settled. Eli slept on the floor by her door, his rifle at his side. He would not, could not, touch her. Not here. He felt the weight of the city pressing in, the weight of her old life. He was a trapper. He was out of his element. He was waiting for the trap to spring. It sprang on the 3rd day. It was not a letter. It was the men. The man named Pinkerton, and 2 others, their long dusters failing to hide the pistols at their hips. They were standing in the hallway when Eli opened the door to get water. "Walker," Pinkerton said. His voice was no longer polite. "We knew you were lying." Eli's hand was on his gun in a flash. "Get out! We are not here for you," Pinkerton said, his eyes cold. He held up a hand. "We are here with an offer." From behind him, a new man stepped forward. He was not a Pinkerton. He was dressed in a fine, Eastern-cut suit, a pearl gray vest, and a bowler hat. He looked at Eli with an expression of profound, bored distaste. "Mr. Walker," the man in the suit said, his voice slick, "my name is Harrison. I am legal counsel for Mr. Alistair Crown. He holds Miss Harrington in the highest esteem. He is, however, a practical man. He understands that complications arise." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick envelope. Mr. Crown is prepared to offer you $5,000 in cash, a gesture of appreciation for your services in keeping Miss Harrington safe during the winter. Eli looked at the envelope. $5,000. It was a fortune. It was more money than he had seen in his entire life. It was enough to buy his father's ranch back, 10 times over. And what does he want for this appreciation? Eli asked, his voice a low growl. He wants you to disappear, Harrison said simply. He wants you to ride out of Helena and keep riding. Miss Harrington has confused her gratitude with affection. Once you are gone, she will come to her senses. We will take her home. Eli looked at the money, then at the man. He smiled, a slow, cold pulling of his lips that did not touch his eyes. You tell Mr. Crown, he said, his voice quiet, that he can take his $5,000 and he can go to hell. Harrison's smile faltered. The sneer returned. I see. The hard way. Then, get out of this house, Eli said. This is not over. Pinkerton cut in, his hand on his own gun. We can take her, and you will be a memory in a mud puddle. Her father is here. The voice came from inside the room. Maggie stepped into the doorway, her hair braided and coiled, her face set. She was not wearing his flannel, but the mended blue dress, and in it, she was every inch the heiress. You are Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice like ice. The lawyer was taken aback. Miss Harrington, I am so glad we have found you. Your father is frantic. My father is in San Francisco, Maggie said. No, miss, Pinkerton said, with a grim smile. He is not. He is here. He came on a special train with Mr. Crown. He is at his new house, on the hill, and he wants to see you. Maggie's blood ran cold. Her father, here, and Alistair. He requests your presence, Harrison said, immediately. And if I refuse, then Mr. Walker will be arrested, Harrison said, his voice flat. The territorial marshal is a personal friend of your father. He has already heard a very compelling story about a trapper who kidnapped a woman of means and has been holding her for ransom. $5,000, I believe, was the amount. The trap. It was perfect. Maggie looked at Eli. His face was murderous. He was ready to fight, to kill them all and die in the hallway. She put her hand on his chest. No, she whispered. Then she looked back at the lawyer. Tell my father and Mr. Crown that I will be there in 1 hour. A wise choice, Harrison said, bowing. He and the Pinkertons turned and left, their boots heavy on the stairs. The door closed. Maggie leaned against it, her strength failing. They will kill you, Eli. They will try, he said, his jaw tight. He was checking the shells in his rifle. No, she said, taking his face in her hands. This is my fight. You got me out of the snow. You cannot fight this. This is my world. It is uglier than you know. Then I am coming with you, he said. I held you in a blizzard. I can hold you in a parlor. Silas Harrington's house was not a house. It was a monument to arrogance, a 3-story Victorian monstrosity built of brick and carved timber, perched on a hill overlooking Helena, a literal and figurative statement of power. It was a San Francisco mansion, dropped into the heart of the mountains, and it was grotesque. A butler in a black suit, his face pinched with disapproval, opened the massive, carved oak doors. He looked at Maggie with recognition, and then at Eli with a horror that was almost comical. Miss Margaret, the butler sniffed. Your father is in the drawing room. He requests that your companion wait in the hall. My companion will wait with me, Maggie said, her voice sharp. She took Eli's arm, and with her head held high, she swept past the butler, her mended boots silent on the plush, imported carpets. The drawing room was dark, suffocating, filled with heavy carved furniture, velvet drapes that blocked the mountain sun, and the smell of stale cigars and expensive brandy. 3 men stood by the fireplace. Her father, Silas Harrington, was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains, but his was a cold, Gray, polished granite. His eyes were the color of new silver, and just as hard. Her mother, a pale, trembling woman in a silk dress, was clutching a handkerchief by the window. A non-entity, and him, Alistair Crown. He was handsome, in the way a sharpened blade is handsome. He was tall, blond, his suit perfectly tailored, a diamond pin in his cravat. He was smiling, a slow, condescending smile. When they entered, all conversation stopped. Silas Harrington's face became rigid. Maggie's mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Alistair was the first to speak. He let his gaze travel up and down Eli, from his muddy, worn-out boots to his scarred face, to the rough buckskin coat. "My God, Margaret," Alistair said, his voice a smooth, cultured drawl. This is what you left me for? He smells of beaver. Look at his hands. They are filthy. And that rather impressive scar on his cheek. Did he get that fighting a badger for scraps?" Eli stood still. He was a mountain, unmoving. His hand was on the butt of his pistol, but his eyes were on Maggie. He was waiting. Maggie did not flinch. She stepped forward, into the center of the room, her hand still linked with Eli's. "His name," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the room, "is Eli Walker, and he is worth more than every man in this room and every painting on these walls." "Margaret, that is enough," her father boomed, his face turning a dark, dangerous red. "You will be silent. You have embarrassed this family for the last time. You will come home, you will marry Alistair, and this incident will be forgotten. As for this savage, he will be in jail by tonight for kidnapping and vagrancy." "Will he be in jail?" Maggie repeated, laughing, a cold, sharp sound that startled them all. "For what? For saving the life you all put at risk? For giving me food when I was starving, and shelter when I was freezing? While you," she pointed a finger at Alistair, "were posting rewards for me like I was a lost spaniel? You ungrateful wretch," her father roared. "I am ungrateful," Maggie shot back, her voice rising. "I am ungrateful because I refused to be sold like a side of beef? Because I refused to marry a man who told me he would break me? No, father, I am not the one who is ungrateful. I am the one who is finally free." "You are not free," Alistair shouted, his perfect composure finally cracking. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "You are mine. Our families signed the contract." Before Alistair's fingers could tighten, Eli moved. He was not a man of parlors, but he was a man of action. He did not draw his gun. He did not need to. He simply moved, his hand clamping down on Alistair's wrist like a steel trap. Alistair cried out, his knees buckling as Eli applied effortless, crushing pressure. "Take your hand off her," Eli said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, terrifying growl. "Eli, no!" Maggie said, pulling at his arm. Silas Harrington's hand went to a bell pull. "I will have the marshal here in 2 minutes." Eli did not release his grip. He looked at Alistair's pale, contorted face. "I am not in your parlor," Eli said to him, his voice low. "You are in my wilderness, and out here we do not put our hands on a woman." He shoved Alistair away. The man stumbled back, crashing into a small, ornate table, which overturned with a smash of porcelain. "That is enough," Silas Harrington roared. He was not a fool. He was a businessman. He saw the violence in Eli, and he saw the iron in his daughter. He was not managing a family. He was managing a hostile merger. "Alistair, be quiet," Silas snapped. "Margaret, you want your freedom? You want this gutter rat? Fine." He went to a massive desk, pulled out a stack of documents, and a pen. "You are an embarrassment. This is a financial matter. You will sign away your inheritance, every dollar, every piece of land, every stock. You will sign a paper renouncing any claim to the Harrington name or fortune. Now and forever. You will be disowned. You will be a legal stranger." He threw the papers on the desk. "You want him? That is the price." He expected her to weep, to beg, to bargain. Maggie walked to the desk. She looked at her mother. "Mother?" The woman just wept into her handkerchief. Maggie looked at her father, his face a mask of cold fury. She looked at Alistair, who was nursing his wrist, his eyes full of hatred. "Get me the pen," Maggie said. She did not read the documents. She knew what they said. They said she was free. She picked up the heavy silver pen, dipped it in the inkwell, and at the bottom of page after page, she signed her name. Margaret Harrington, Margaret Harrington, Margaret Harrington. Her signature was not the trembling scrawl of the girl who had run away. It was firm, strong, and clear. She finished. She set the pen down. She looked at her father. "Is that all?" Silas Harrington stared at the papers, at the ink, at the millions she had just signed away as if it were a hotel register. He was, for the first time in his life, speechless. Maggie turned. She walked over to Eli, who had not moved, who had just watched her with a look of such profound, blazing pride that it made her heart swell. She took his large, scarred, clean hand in hers. "Let's go. Eli!" They walked out. They did not run. They walked, their heads high, through the suffocating drawing room, past the stunned butler, and out the massive oak doors. They stood on the steps, the cool, clean, mountain air hitting their faces. Below them, the lights of Helena were beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Maggie took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first clean breath she had taken in her life. She turned to Eli, a small, trembling smile on her face. "Well," she whispered, her voice shaking with the aftermath, "I have nothing. I am as poor as you are. Mr. Walker." Eli looked at her. The mountain wind was whipping her hair. Her face was pale, but her eyes were on fire. He reached out, his hand gentle, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't need silver," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You already shine." They walked down the long, winding drive, away from the house on the hill. They walked back into the town, their steps light. They were free, but they were in a town where her father was king. They could not stay. They went to the livery. Buster whinnied, nudging Eli's chest, looking for the treat he knew was not there. Eli stroked the horse's neck, his throat tight. "He is all I have," he said to Maggie, his voice quiet. "My last piece of old life." "And he is not enough for two." He turned to the livery owner, a man he had bartered with for hay. "What will you give me for him?" The man looked at the horse. A good, strong, seasoned animal. $100. Mr. Walker. He is a fine piece of stock." "He is," Eli said, his voice thick. He unlashed his saddle, his blanket, his rifle. He held the horse's bridle one last time, pressing his forehead against the animal's. "Thank you, boy," he whispered. He took the $100. It was a grubby, stained roll of bills, but it was their future. They walked to the train depot. They did not look back. "Where are we going?" Maggie asked. As they stood on the platform, Eli looked at the board. The train going east, to the cities, to the world they had just left, and the train going west, to the new territories, to places that were still just names on a map, to the wild mountain valleys of Idaho, Oregon, Washington. He bought 2 tickets on the westbound train. "To somewhere no one knows the name Harrington," Eli said, handing her up the steps. "And somewhere we can find a new name for Walker." The train whistle blew, a long, lonesome, hopeful sound in the night. They sat on the hard, wooden bench, homeless, penniless, and free. Eli took her hand, his large and rough, hers small and strong. They were headed west, into the wild, and for the first time they were both, truly, going home. They rode west for 11 days, until the land itself seemed to forget their names. The railroad, a fragile, steel artery of the new world, let them off at a raw, new town that was little more than a collection of tents and one muddy street. From there, Eli took their last $50 and bought what they could not carry on their backs: an axe, a good saw, a sack of flour, a side of bacon, a mule, and a rifle for her. They left the town and walked for another week, north into a valley he had only heard of in whispers, a place the maps had not yet claimed. It was a small, high valley, cupped in the palm of a mountain range, with a stream so clear it looked like liquid glass. A spring, sheltered by a grove of ancient aspens, bubbled from the earth. It was here. Eli decided this was the place. He began to build, and this time, he was not building a trapper's hovel, a temporary box to keep the wind out. He was building a home. He was a man possessed, his movements driven by a new, sharp purpose. He felled the trees, lodgepole pines, straight and strong. He notched them with a precision that was an art, his axe strokes so sure they sounded like a rhythm, a heartbeat in the silent valley. Maggie did not watch. She worked. She, who had struggled to sweep a dirt floor, now found a strength she never knew she possessed. She hauled. She dragged the smaller limbs to a clearing. She learned to use a draw knife, peeling the bark from the logs until they were pale and smooth, the pine scent clinging to her hands and hair. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. Her hands, which had just begun to heal, split and bled anew. Her back, unaccustomed to anything but a straight-backed chair, ached with a fire that made her want to weep. But she did not weep. Every log she helped move, every bucket of mud she mixed with grass to chink the walls, was an act of defiance. It was a testament. She was not the girl who had fainted at the sight of a dead rabbit. She was not the heiress who had signed away a fortune. She was building her life, one log at a time, with her own 2 hands. Eli watched her, his heart a tight, full thing in his chest. He saw her grimace as she lifted a rock, but she did not drop it. He saw her frustration when she failed, but she tried again. He never pushed her. He never had to. Her pride was a thing of iron. It took them 2 months. The cabin was larger than his old one, with 2 rooms and a real glass window that Eli had carried, wrapped in their blankets, all the way from the settlement. He built a sturdy table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame, woven with rawhide. It was a palace. Their life settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by fear or finance. They were poor, poorer than Eli had ever been, but they were not starving. He was trapped, but not for pelts to sell. He was trapped for meat, and he taught her. He taught her to shoot the new rifle. At first, she flinched, the sound echoing her old terrors, but Eli was patient. "It is a tool," he said, his hands on her shoulders, positioning her. "Like your needle, like my axe. You tell it what to do. It does not tell you. Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull." The first time she hit the pine cone he had set on a log, a whoop of such pure, childish joy escaped her lips that Eli laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that startled them both. She became a good shot, not a natural, but a careful, steady, and deadly one. She planted a garden. She turned the rich, dark earth by the spring, and with seeds bought with the meat from a deer, she planted carrots, onions, beans, potatoes. She fussed over it like a mother, weeding, watering, protecting the tender shoots from late frosts. When she pulled the first stunted carrot from the soil, she held it up like it was a diamond. "Eli, look!" she had cried, running to him. "It is food." He had taken it from her, wiped the dirt on his pants, and crunched into it. "Sweeter than candy," he had said, his eyes crinkling, and she had glowed with a pride that her father's millions had never been able to buy. They bought chickens, a scrawny, loud flock that Maggie guarded with the ferocity of a wolf. She learned to bake bread that was light and sweet, not the rock-hard biscuits of her first attempt. She learned to mend her own clothes, to salt and smoke the meat Eli brought home, to see the world in terms of its simple, hard-won gifts: a full larder, a dry roof, a warm fire. She found herself smiling, not the polite, brittle smile of the San Francisco drawing rooms, but a real, wide, deep smile that came from her belly. She smiled more in this one-room, hand-built cabin than she had in her entire life. Her past was not gone, but it had lost its power. It was a story she had read, not a life she was living. Here, she was just Maggie, and Maggie was happy. She found a deep, profound peace in the simple rituals of the day, but her greatest joy, the one that was a secret, quiet ache in her chest, was watching him. She would be at the stream, scrubbing their clothes on a washboard, and she would see him in the meadow, splitting wood for the coming winter. He would be shirtless in the summer sun, his skin brown, his body a map of lean, hard muscle. He moved with an animal grace, a competence that was so complete it was beautiful. He was part of the land. He was not fighting it. He was in harmony with it. She would stop, her hands in the cold water, and just watch him, a flush rising in her, a mix of pure, unadulterated desire and a deep, soul-shattering gratitude. He was hers. This man, this mountain, this gentle, violent, quiet man was hers. Their nights were a different kind of peace. The raw, desperate hunger of their first encounter had cooled, deepened, and ripened into something else. It was a slow, deep, knowing love. It was the touch of his hand on her back as they passed in the small cabin. It was the way he would tuck a blanket around her feet when she fell asleep reading the one book they owned, a tattered copy of Shakespeare he had traded a pelt for. They would lie in the bed he had built, their bodies fitting together, the fire painting the log walls in shades of gold. He would tell her stories of his childhood, of the ranch, of his father, stories he had never told another living soul, and she would tell him of her life, not the story of her escape, but the small, sad, human details of a girl who had never been heard. He would touch her face, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his eyes full of a wonder that still, after all this time, she was here. "You are real," he would whisper. "I am real," she would whisper back, and she would kiss his rough hand, the hand that had killed and built and saved. Love was not a thunderclap. It was a fire, which tended to every day. It was the small, steady accumulation of 1,000 quiet moments. It was the promise of a shared future, built on the solid ground of a shared past. Then the storm came. It was not a winter storm. It was a betrayal of spring. A warm wind had blown for days, melting the last of the high country snow. Then the wind turned, and the sky opened. It was a cold, torrential rain, a deluge that turned their peaceful valley into a chaotic, roaring nightmare. The stream by the cabin became a river. The river became a flood. For 2 days, they were prisoners, the water lapping at the very stones of their foundation. The trail to the settlement, their one fragile link to the outside world, was not just mud. It was a churning, impassable wash. And then Maggie became ill. It started as a shiver, a cough she blamed on the damp. But by the 3rd day of the rain, she was burning. A fever took her, a vicious, dry heat that left her delirious, her lungs rattling with every breath. Eli, who had faced down blizzards and armed men, was struck with a terror so cold it froze his blood. It is just a cold, Eli," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, her eyes too bright. "Hush," he said, his voice gentle, his face a mask of stone. He piled blankets on her. He boiled water with pine needles, an old remedy his father had used. He spoon-fed her broth, but she could not keep it down. By the 4th day, she did not know him. She was back in San Francisco, begging Alistair to let her go. She was in the snow, crying his name. He sat by her bed, his hands clenched, his helplessness a physical, choking thing. The land, the wilderness he loved, was killing her. The medicines of the earth were failing. She needed quinine. She needed a doctor. The settlement was 50 miles away. The trail was gone. The river a death trap. He looked at her, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He thought of his promise. "Don't ever leave me." He kissed her forehead, his lips brushing the dry, hot skin. "I will not leave you, Maggie. I am just going to get help." He did not know if she heard him. He left her water, a loaded rifle he knew she could not lift, and he bolted the door from the outside, a betrayal that tore at his gut. He went to the mule, the last living thing he had besides her, and he threw a saddle on it. He took his rifle, his hat, and he rode into the flood. The ride was a special kind of hell. It was not a ride, it was a swim, a climb, a prayer. The trail was gone. A memory under 10 feet of roaring, muddy water. He had to go high, onto the ridges, fighting through unbroken, soaking timber. The mule, sure-footed and brave, slipped, falling on a slick rock face, nearly pitching them both into a canyon. Eli's leg was pinned, the animal screaming. He had to cut the cinch to free them both, losing his saddle, his blanket, his food. He walked, he ran, he stumbled, he fell. He swam a river that should have killed him, the icy water a tangible, evil thing, pulling him under. He lost his rifle, he lost his hat. He did not care. He just kept moving. He was driven by one singular, terrifying thought. A cold, empty cabin. He arrived at the settlement. He did not walk in. He fell. He was a creature of mud and blood, his clothes torn to ribbons, his face bleeding, his leg a mass of agony. He collapsed on the boardwalk of the general store. People came running. They thought he was a madman. "Medicine," he gasped, grabbing the storekeeper's shirt. "Fever. My wife. She is dying. I need quinine. Doctor." The town had no doctor, but it had medicine. The storekeeper, seeing the look in Eli's eyes, the look of a man on the edge of the grave, did not argue. He gave him laudanum, quinine powder, and a flask of brandy. "You will not make it back, son," the man said, his voice full of pity. "The trails are gone. You look like death. Give me a horse." Eli gasped, pushing himself up. "You have no money." "He has no money," Eli said, his voice a rasp. "But I have this." He was delirious, broken. Just let me take the horse," Eli pleaded. He was not a proud man now. He was a beggar. I will work for you for a year." The storekeeper looked at this wild, broken man. He sighed. He went to the livery and gave him a horse, an old, tired mare. "Godspeed, son." The ride back was a blur of agony. He was frozen. His leg was on fire. He held the small, precious bottle of medicine in his hand. A fist clenched so tight his nails drew blood. He did not sleep. He did not stop. He rode the horse until it nearly died, and then he walked, pulling it. He staggered back to the cabin. He had been gone for 3 days. It felt like 3 years. He fumbled at the door, his hands numb, his mind gray with exhaustion. He fell inside. She was there. She had not moved. She was paler, if possible. Her breathing so shallow he could not see her chest move. For one heart-stopping, apocalyptic second, he thought he was too late. "Maggie," he whispered, collapsing at her bedside. "Maggie, I am here." He forced the medicine, mixed with brandy and water, between her lips. A little spilled, a little went down. He did it again, and then there was nothing to do but wait. He did not move from the chair. He did not take off his wet, torn clothes. He sat, his body screaming, his leg a world of pain, and he took her hand. It was as cold as a stone. He put his head down on the rough blanket, his cheek pressed to her hand, and the man who had survived the loss of his land, the death of his father, a decade of brutal, soul-crushing loneliness. He broke. It was not a loud sound. It was a silent, shuddering quake. Tears, hot and stinging, fell from his eyes, the first he had shed since he was a boy. He wept. He wept for his own pain, for his fear, for the sheer, terrible, unjust fragility of it all. He wept for the thought of being alone again, in a world that had finally showed him a moment of grace. He held her hand to his face, and he cried until there was nothing left. He woke to a touch. It was not a dream. It was a faint, feather-light pressure on his hair. He raised his head, his neck stiff, his eyes gritty. Maggie was looking at him. Her eyes were not bright with fever. They were clear, weak, but clear. She was pale, her face gaunt, but she was her. "Eli," she whispered, her voice a dry leaf. He could not speak. He just stared, his heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat. She looked at her hand, still clutched in his, and then at his face. She saw the dried tear tracks on his beard-stubbled cheeks, the raw, red-rimmed eyes. the utter desolation that had, moments before, been his entire world. "You cried," she whispered. Her fingers, weak, brushed his cheek. Eli could not hold it back. A single, choked sob escaped him. He buried his face in her hand, his shoulders shaking. "I thought I lost you," he rasped, his voice thick. "You did not," she whispered, her hand stroking his hair. "You did not. You came back." Spring came again. A real spring, full of green and warmth and the smell of the world being born. Maggie's strength returned. Slowly, and with it, a new, unbreakable bond. They had faced the wild, and they had faced the world. They had survived both. One evening, they were sitting on the porch Eli had built, watching the sun turn the mountains to purple and gold. The air was soft. "We should get married," Maggie said. Eli turned to look at her, surprised. I thought, we are, aren't we?" "In our hearts," she said, smiling. "But I want to say it. I want the mountains to hear it. I want it to be real, for them, too." Eli nodded. "All right, we will get married." There was no preacher. There were no guests. There was no white dress, no ring of gold. He took her to the grove of aspens, by the spring, at dusk. He had spent the day carving, his hands, so rough and strong, moving with a surprising delicacy. He had carved a ring from a piece of smooth, white alder wood. They stood by a fire he had built, the flames dancing, the stars beginning to show in the twilight sky. He did not know the words. He did not have a prayer book. He just took her hands. "Maggie," he said, his voice thick, "I do not have anything. I have no land. I have no money. I have no name to give you but my own, and it is not worth much." "It is worth everything to me," she whispered, her eyes shining. I cannot promise you a soft life. I cannot promise you will ever be rich again. I can only promise you this." He stepped closer. "I will stand between you and the wind. I will feed you. I will keep you warm. I will love you every day, until the day I die. I am your man, Maggie. If you will have me." "I will have you," she said, the tears she had promised herself she would not shed, rolling down her cheeks. "I do not want a soft life, Eli. I just want this life. With you. I promise to haul the wood and plant the garden and to love you. To love you when the sun is shining, and to love you even more when the storms come." He slid the simple, carved wooden ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He leaned in, and he kissed his wife. That night, they lay in the bed he had built, wrapped in each other, the fire banked and glowing. The cabin was filled with a deep, profound, and holy peace. Maggie lay with her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the scars on his skin, her ring a smooth, warm presence on her hand. "Eli," she whispered into the darkness. He murmured, his lips in her hair. "You did not just save me from the snow. I would have died, that is true, but that was just my body. You saved me, from the cage, from the fear, from the ghosts." She raised her head, looking at him in the dim, red light. "You saved me from everything." Eli was silent for a long moment. He looked at her, this impossible, beautiful, strong woman who had signed away a fortune and learned to shoot a rifle, who had faced down her past and fought off death. He pulled her closer, his voice rough. "And you," he said, "you did something no one else ever could. Not my father, not the land, not even me. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever." "What?" she whispered. "Hope." They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, under a roof they had built, in a valley the maps had not yet found, and outside, the stars, which had looked down on the rise and fall of mountains, on the rush for gold, on the building of empires and the death of kings, looked down on them. They were a million, cold, indifferent eyes, and they did not care about silver, or titles, or the class of men. They only cared for the light, and for the two small, warm, beating hearts that had survived the wild, and found a universe in each other. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. We truly hope you enjoyed this tale of survival and love. Please, let us know what you thought of the story in the comments. and tell us where you are listening from in the world. We would love to hear from you. Do not forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this. Your support means the world to us.